Welcome to the Real Board Loft. I'm Trip Foreman. We have Real team rider Brett Barley with us. We are here for the season finale of Under the Glass. Brett, we've had a great time watching you work your way through the Real Board Loft and kind of choose and pick all these favorite boards that you want to surf, especially after coming off of 10 plus years with Super Brand. What we want to go over in the season finale episode is 5 lessons learned. Obviously we went in depth on every one of these boards, but I think there should be some takeaways, from season 1 Under the Glass, obviously stuff that you experience yourself that you're going to take away, but something that our viewers can take away, boards at this level, but also whatever boards that they're riding, wherever they're surfing. So let's talk about 5 lessons learned. What's number 1? What is the very first thing you experienced?
I'd say the first thing that I learned, and this is funny because I texted a group chat of friends that I have literally that day. I walked into the shop and you were like, well, what do you want? And I was so overwhelmed with options and completely lost at where to even start.
It's kind of hard to choose from. And now I'm actually really overwhelmed. Trip keeps being like, well, what do you want? I'm like, I don't know, what do any of them do?
And so I've heard, friends talk about how difficult it is, hearing buddies chat about, Lost and Pizel and all these things and going back and forth. And for 10 years, I just rode the same thing. So I didn't even have to think about it. So my world of surfboards was this big. And then all of a sudden it was opened up and I was just like, wow, this is kind of gnarly. I get why it's so hard for someone to commit to a board and to make sure you pick the right one. I mean, there's so many different brands, so many different shapes. The foam's different, everyone's shape's different. So it's where do you start? And that for me was I was just overwhelmed.
We're gonna call that overwhelmedness. Overwhelmedness. So when you came into the board loft, it was, and we see this a lot, you know what I mean? Because you'll see the Real Board Loft, 1,500 boards, and people come up the stairs and they turn the corner and their eyes are this big and they sort of look like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah. Honestly, you'll have more boards than I even knew too.
Yeah, we just kept going and going and back.
I've been riding for y'all for 8 years and I was just oh my gosh, there's boards everywhere, stuck into every crevice. I was like, this is out of control. It's so wild.
So, the way that we break it down, with customers in the loft, and I remember that very first night, the way we broke it down with you is okay, so rather than it be choosing one board from 1,500, we were okay, this next swell, what do you think that next swell is going to be? And let's get boards for that specific swell.
Right. And so that was our starting point. I would say, to combat that overwhelmness, as we said, and where do I start? It's, for us, we use that swell. I would say for something that I learned and can suggest to other people is that focus on what type of waves you're surfing. Instead of being there's an infinite amount of possibilities, look at all right, am I riding point breaks? Am I riding beach breaks? Are the waves I surf more often soft or are they heavy? Depending on how much rocker you want or not. Mm-hmm. And then you can dial in, all of a sudden there's not 1,500 boards, there's 100 or 200 or whatever. And then you keep dialing it down to this is what I like. And then, okay, well, these are kind of the options. Well, these are kind of the options that fit into, and narrow it down from there. That was how we got started. And I would say, that's the best way to go about it. And, understanding that I think something that I did to make sure that when I picked a board, it would work, was just making sure I didn't pick a board too small.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing. I would rather have a board that's a little too big than a little too small. Because if it's a little too big, you can ride it in anything. And it's going to feel big and you're not going to necessarily love it, but you're going to be able to ride it and you're going to have fun. Whereas this happened to me. I picked one board that was a little too small and I couldn't even really ride it. And so then I couldn't really have as much fun on it. And it was just because it was just a little too small. And so I would say narrowing it down, but then making sure to err on the side of more size than less.
Okay, and then the last subject to touch on in the overwhelmness is what do you want this new board to do in your quiver? Define it, and then go in and look for a board that's going to fill that gap. In your quiver.
Well, and that's how I ended up with this. Was I got short boards and performance and tube boards and high performance bigger board step ups, and I was okay, well, what's missing in between? And it was something that was different.
Something different.
Something I don't normally ride.
Right. Well, then actually that's a great way to segue into lesson learned number 2 is ride something different.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. I think for me in my surfing, I've always been so one-dimensional and focused on performance. And there's something that comes with when you hop on something that's wider that's like a twin fin in this case, something that makes you draw your turns out, that makes you stand up on the board and look at the wave and surf it differently than you normally would. Then when I hop back on like my driver, I'm surfing the wave different as well. I found this years ago riding, like when I started riding like shorter, wider boards and small surf, it was making me draw my turns out more. Even though I used to always just ride a short board, even if it was small, because I was just like, well, this is what I ride it, and I can ride it, so like this is fine.
Yeah.
And then when I got on something wider that made me draw my turns out, when I hopped back on my short boards, I was doing better turns. And so I would say that this is the same thing with the fish. A lot of times as a surfer, if all you ride is short boards, sometimes you can get into a place where like you're forcing and overpowering the board, especially if you're riding, you know, in smaller surf a lot. And then it kind of hurts your surfing. So hopping on something that forces you to think differently, to step outside that box and to draw your turns out more, is it actually then helps your surfing when you get back on.
And it could be anything, right? It could be a fish.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a fish.
It could be a single fin.
Yeah.
It could be like a like what.
Or even
like,
just some wide
like
disc shape.
Yeah, like what Benny rides, like that bar of soap thing.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, just something
different. Because like honestly too, I ended up all summer long had this in my truck, and I had way more fun than if I would have had like the sub driver and been trying to like do turns every day. Like even though that would have worked, and that would have been fun and fine, I had more fun riding something different on those like less than stellar days. And so that just like, it literally was in my truck all summer long.
All right, so let's go to lesson learned number 3, opening up your world to EPS epoxy.
Yeah, so I would say I have always been like into regular stock polyurethane boards. I have had some epoxies, but they were for specific situations and specific conditions, waves, whatever, size range. I would say hopping on the driver and the sub driver, I was riding them in, you know, windier conditions, maybe bigger conditions, like waves that I wouldn't normally ride in epoxy in, only because I was trying them out. That is 100% the only reason. I was like, well, I want to see how this goes, even though these aren't the right conditions. And I was actually surprised at how well they went in the wind, in bigger surf, powerful surf, chunky surf. Obviously, like, a poly's gonna go way better in windy conditions always. It just, they don't bounce through the chop. But I was pretty blown away. And I've found that this construction, the Lightspeed construction, you know, stringerless, like, I really love those boards. The Driver 2.0 and that construction is just like, the feeling that I get surfing that board in the, you know, waves, like chest to head or foot overhead, like, I absolutely love that board. So it's like even gonna be hard to like get it in a poly because I'm gonna be like, well, is it gonna ride the same? Obviously tons of guys ride them all the time, all over the world, but I love that construction. I was honestly blown away to hop on that and feel it out. I would say in my head, I didn't expect it to do as well as it did. And now it's like, well, that's kind of all I really want. Like,
that's become your go-to for that, shortboard. And you know, the interesting thing, you know, that happened with the driver, right? And I think it happens to a lot of other people, is you end up having that like aha moment or that aha session. And you know, this one happened, and it normally happens for some completely weird reason. You know, like this one, it happened because we didn't have that size in poly. And so you grabbed it and be like, well, let's just give it a shot. You know, and then all of a sudden, boom. You know, other times, like you could be out there and like, you know, break a board and have this other board that you never tried, and then all of a sudden you use it and it ends up being like a really good board. You know, so yeah, that was cool to watch. So Brett, lesson 4. Okay, you came into this thing like, I'm a thruster guy. Like, no, I don't surf quads. And actually, Corey Lopez was the same thing. We're like, hey, try this board as a quad. He's like, hey, I'm a thruster guy. So lesson 4, we're gonna talk about thruster guys, quads, and just fins in general.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, like I said, I hadn't ridden a quad in 10 years. We talked about in the episode when we broke out the potato launcher. OG. It was actually really funny when talking to Adam. I was like, yeah, man, please put like a 5th fin in there, because like, I just like thrusters, and I would 100% have ridden it as a thruster the first time I surfed it, and then transitioned into quad from there. But he was just like, he's like, the board is shaped to be a quad.
Right.
He's like, it's shaped to be a quad, and he just made it a full-blown quad. And what's funny was, so then it forced me to ride it as a quad, and I did fumble around by like messing up the fins. But I was proven wrong. I was proven wrong that I don't like quads. I've told people for years, because they're like, well, why don't you try a quad? And I just am always like, I just don't really like quads. And Adam proved me wrong with the potato launcher. I absolutely love this board. I trust this board, and I realize that there is an application for quads. And so I would say something that like coming into this that I've learned is that like, you know, it's pretty easy to get like very pigeonholed into like, this is what I like, and not opening it up. And I got to say thanks to Adam for like making me get over that and try it out. And I would say whether you're someone who only rides thrusters and is like, oh, I don't like quads, or someone who only rides quads and is like, oh, thrusters don't work for me, like it is good to try them out. That's why I still like a 5-fin setup, because you can try both.
Right, but he had to force you. So
but he had to force you. He didn't even put the box in there. And like he said, the fin setup is different. Where he places the boxes for a quad is different than like a 5-fin. So I get it, it makes sense. But I would say to not let yourself get that focused that you're just like, I can't ride this.
Yeah.
Because that's how I was. I was like, no, I can't ride that. I won't ride a quad. And then I did and was like, oh, okay, I like this. Like I was wrong. And
yeah, because the stock potato launchers come 5-fin.
Yeah.
And so people do have the ability to go thruster, but he knew, based on your
I
input,
wouldn't
that if he sent you a 5-finner, that you would just go thruster and maybe never switch it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing is, you're right. Like just keeping your mindset open, to the different fin setups, but a lot's changed in the boards too, in the last 10 years, compared to what you may have not liked a quad in 10 years ago.
And even honestly thinking back, like even just like kind of playing around with the quad fin setup a little more and like trying different trailers, trying different front fins. I might have actually just been riding the wrong set of fins in my quads before. And so I think that's like another thing is like, regardless, whether it's quads or thrusters, if you have buddies that have different fins templates, try them out, swap them out with each other, see what you like. Like you could straight up turn a board that you don't like into a magic board. Yeah. And vice versa. You could have a magic board and then you swap fins. You're like, oh, this feels weird.
Horrible, yeah.
And it makes you realize that like how big of a difference fins do make in a board. And so yeah, don't get pigeonholed into like, this is all I ride. It's okay to try out other things. You might be surprised.
So lesson number 5.
I think this is the biggest lesson.
You think so? Out of all 5 of these?
I think this is probably the biggest lesson that I have learned in trying to like hop around different companies and different shapes.
All right, and lesson number 5, here it comes. So we build up a little bit of suspense, is volume, right?
Dimensions in general.
Yeah,
but
dimensions,
yes,
volume. Don't read a book by its cover.
Yeah, I would say with each of these boards, now something coming into this, I'd been riding the same dims with Super Brand for years. And I was kind of at a point where I was like, oh, I need to go a little bit, thicker or wider, something, change it up. Mm-hmm. And so there was like a whole book, like can of worms that was open to me trying to like not only do that, but then hop on different boards. But something that I kept doing was like, okay, well, these are the dims I've been riding and these are the leaders I've been riding. Mm-hmm. And that was what I was thinking, I need the boards that I'm getting on to line up with that.
I remember that. You were like locked on like your widths, like just locked.
Yeah. And, I ended up hopping on the driver, which is a little bit wider. I think it was a little bit thicker, like a whole liter extra. And it was just like perfect from the get-go. And so then I started from there to like, okay, this works, like what else works? But then going to like, the potato launcher was, this thing's 27 liters. Even though it's nearly the exact same dimensions as the 2 boards I used to ride, it's almost 2 full liters more. And so I would say if I walked into a shop, I would look at that and just be like, oh, that's too thick, or there's something too much there. Yeah, because 27 liters for like a board this size for me is like a lot. He hides it all up in here, and it didn't ride, like it paddled like it was 27 liters, but it didn't ride like it was 2 liters more than what I liked, or a liter more than what I liked. In the opposite, this Pizel Ghost, I was looking at was like 5'10", 18 3/4, like 2.3 something. And I was like, that's kind of wide and tall. Like typically my short boards, like the driver or something, is like 5'9" to 5'10", 18.5 to 18.6. So 18 3/4 for me for a 5'10" seemed big. But I looked at the liters and was like, well, it says 25 point something. I wouldn't want to go smaller.
Right.
But then I hopped on the board and it paddles like insane. It paddles like this, even though technically it's like a liter and a half less.
Yep.
Or it might even paddle better. There's so much foam up under the chest.
Right.
I would say that it's very easy to be like, oh, I can only ride 26 liters. Or, oh, I can only ride whatever, whatever your liters are. They're probably not 26, but, or I can only ride 18 and a half or whatever. And it'll straight up jack up. You're gonna end up picking the wrong boards. Or you're going to like limit yourself and miss out on a good board.
Yeah.
I think this board, I could have gone a little smaller. I could have gone 5'9" or 5'8". If I hid the liters, I would have maybe picked a different board.
Okay.
Instead of being like, I went straight to the leaders and was like, oh, I can't go smaller and I don't want to go taller than 5'10", so that's what I picked. So that worked as well. But I would say when you're talking about all these different brands all these different shapers, all these different models. The foam is laid out different in all of them.
Yeah.
You know, from a shortboard to like a slightly, you know, wider forward point on a groveler shortboard, to a fish, to a tube specific board, to like a turn, like step up tube specific, like they're just all such different boards. So like, even though this board is taller and wider by like a hair compared to the driver, dimensionally it shouldn't be that much different. Leader wise, they're not a whole lot different. This paddles in a league above, like far beyond what either of those boards. Even though it's like roughly the same numbers. Roughly the same numbers. Like that's barely narrower.
Yeah.
It's about the same thickness. It's like not even half a liter difference technically as far as it's labeled, but it paddles infinitely better. So like, you can't just look at numbers and be like, oh, this board won't work because of these numbers. You know, maybe cover up the liters and think about the board just dimension wise. Like, would I like this? If I just ordered it from somebody, like walked into the local shop and ordered it online and didn't look at the liters and just looked at the dimensions, you know, think about it that way. And then you can kind of like gauge with the liters as well. But I don't think it's healthy to get completely focused on liters, because I've done that in the past. I kind of did that when I was starting to pick these out, and then I've kind of realized like, okay, like, you know, I can use the liters, but I really need to look at the dimensions and where the foam is, you know, whether it's through the whole board and the rails, more up under the chest, more shortboardy, like, and go from there.
There's a lot of different things going on, like, you know, and again, like, you know, you're coming from like the same shaper, the same brand, the board's coming in a box, like everything just getting more and more dialed in, and then now going into a situation where there's, you know, multiple shapers. When you go from a John Pizell to an Adam Warden to a Matt Biolis, like even those guys' dimensions are different. Like their thicknesses, like somebody's like 2.5 might not be the other guy's 2.5. Like you've got different thicknesses, different rail profiles, like from brand to brand. Those dimensions, you know, that's one thing that I think about right away. The other thing is like those 3 dimensions, like your length, your width, and your thickness are literally like 1 point of the board. Like the width is like 1 point of the board. It's not like a bunch of widths the entire way down the board. You know, it's literally like at 1 point, the widest point of the board is that number, and then that gets put on the board.
Right.
But it doesn't talk about like what you were talking about, the design, about where that volume is. And then, you know, the last thing, like what you're talking about is the design, like where, you know, where that volume is way more important than what the number is.
Yeah.
Is what you found out in those 2 boards over there to your left.
I think that's something, you know, that opened my eyes up to like, okay, I can be a little more lenient with what I'm going to order or what I'm going to ride or pick off the rack, and more open-minded, and then it leads me to be more surprised.
All right, so we covered 5 lessons learned, and I think, you know, for you, I mean, it's like these are legit. These are like 5 things that you learned out of these first 5 boards, but, you know, hopefully the viewers get, you know, something out of it as well, like with their own boards and their own quivers. So
I mean, that's the whole point of like this series, and like, you know, what we're doing is to like, I mean, I'm like stepping into that situation that like most every other surfer's been in.
A lot of people mistake this as like reviews only, but it's actually like documenting your transition. I mean, these are like into all the free agent.
These are like all the conversations we've been having for the last 6 months, and I've been having with my friends, is just like, well, I understand like this struggle now and like how hard this is, or like, oh, I understand like wanting to like dive in and talk about this stuff. Whereas before I was just like, I didn't care. I didn't have to care. So it's super fun, and it's fun to like share that and, you know, share my ignorance and with a lot of it, honestly, but then also like my walk through it and like things that I'm learning. Like that's what I want to do.
That's awesome. And you do, I mean, like with your vlog and with this, like you do a great job of like being open with it. You know, like, hey, like, I mean, this is what, and then, well, this actually didn't really work out that way. You know, it's not everything's perfect.
And that's where like, you know, if you do go and like follow any of the video series I do, like each swell, not every swell, but each swell, like when I have those aha moments, or when I have those like, oh, whoops moments, like, you know, it's fun to talk about that and share that one-on-one and like walk through the whole experience.
So we covered our 5 lessons learned. We got a bonus question for you. And that is, are you ready to go back to one brand?
Nah. No, this is super, it's like, I think it's more fun. I think it's like helping me dial in parts of my surfing that were stagnant and improve. I think it's like opening my eyes up to like places that my surfing was struggling, and different boards that help that. It'd be pretty hard to go back one brand specifically now, I think. I'm not saying I couldn't, but
right.
I don't see it happening.
So that's it's a great segue into season 2.
Well, yeah, I mean, they all, like I said, and for the reason I just said a minute ago, each shaper like has their specialty,
right?
Has their thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I'm like excited to like, you know, try more boards out and figure out like, okay, like these are from this brand, these are like the 2 or 3 models that are like perfect for these types of waves.
Yeah.
And from this brand, these are the 2 or 3 models that are perfect for these types of waves, and have like, you know, boards that are specific for, you know, different types of swells we get here, or different locations that I travel to.
Right.
And, you know, like when I go to Hawaii, I'm going to order Pizels for Pipeline and try that out. And that's where it's exciting. It's exciting to not be tied to one brand anymore, I would say.
Yeah, and be able to pick and choose like your favorites, like out of everything that's out there.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, Brett. Thank you so much for joining us, like, you know, in this series and helping us, you know, be. Oh, right.
That was loud.
One.
That was loud.
We can end on that. But no, seriously, thank you for joining us in season 1 Under the Glass, and also for all our viewers out there, everybody that tuned in through all 5 episodes. Thank you so much for joining it. We're really looking forward to season 2, and, you know, kicking this back off again. More boards, more sessions, and, you know, and actually more lessons learned.
Yeah.
along the way.
The learning's not going to stop.
My name's Trip Foreman. This is Brett Barley, and peace out from Under the Glass. Ow! I think I broke 3 of my fingers. Thanks again for tuning in to season 1 of Under the Glass. For our viewers out there that have any questions or would like to place an order for any of the boards that we've featured, either in stock or custom order, or are looking for any additional assistance with their own quivers, you can always give us a call at the shop, 252-987-6000, or look us up online, realwatersports.com/surfing. Thanks again for tuning in.